Good afternoon, everyone. We want to thank everyone for coming out again. We seem to be here quite a bit with these takedowns of guns from throughout the South and that are coming into Queens County. I'm Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz. I'm joined today by New York City Police Commissioner Keechant Sewell, First Deputy Commissioner Edward Caban, Chief of Detectives James Essig, and other NYPD officials in announcing a takedown of a gun trafficking crew involving the infamous Iron Pipeline. From my office are Executive Assistant District Attorney Jerry Brave, Violent Criminal Enterprise Bureau Chief Jonathan Sennett, Deputy Bureau Chief Philip Anderson, and ADA Charles Dunn. We're here today to highlight our joint efforts to cut off the supply of deadly weapons that are purchased in the southern states before being transported and resold here in the city of New York. I want to be very, very clear. This case is not about legally purchased firearms held by law-abiding citizens. We are speaking about illegally smuggled weapons, handguns easily concealed, as you can see, many of which are equipped with high-capacity ammunition feeding devices, weapons intended to be sold illegally and resold and possessed by drivers of crime right here on the streets of the city of New York. Gun violence monumentally alters the life of survivors, of victims' loved ones, and of citizens every single day who are too traumatized to take their children to the park, to take an evening walk with their elderly parents, or to enjoy a night on the town with friends. The economy and the vibrancy of this great city depends on the safety of those who live and those who visit our communities. And this is why my office and the New York City Police Department are relentless in our pursuit of illegal weapons. And a lot of it's about accountability. Accountability. That is crucial when it comes to having a safe city, and it's crucial in the takedown of guns. Since the beginning of this administration in 2020, my office has prosecuted over 2,000 cases involving gun possession, demonstrating the sheer volume of the guns that we have taken off the streets just here in Queens County. Before us, you see 182 recovered firearms, 136 high-capacity magazines, as well as rounds of ammunition, all of which were bought here from the state of Tennessee, and would have likely ended up in the wrong hands if it wasn't for the proactive actions of the New York City Police Department and this office. An approximately 11-month-long investigation carried out by members of the police department and the district attorneys in my office resulted in the arrest of 5 individuals, which we are here to announce. They have all been indicted by a Queens County grand jury this week on 1,611 counts. That's 1,611 counts of criminal possession of a weapon, criminal sale of a firearm, conspiracy, and other crimes for their role in a firearms trafficking operation that spanned from Queens to Tennessee. The top counts on the indictment are Class B violent felonies. They carry a maximum sentence of 50 years in prison. The 5 defendants are 57-year-old Anthony Sanford of Queens County, 40-year-old Oliver Sanford, Anthony's nephew of Queens County, 28-year-old Jonathan Harris of the Bronx, 44-year-old Thomas Parsley of the Bronx, 70-year-old Richard Horn of Blountville, Tennessee. We allege that this gun trafficking crew operated with Jonathan Harris as the main buyer and seller, Richard Horn as the main supplier, and the rest of the defendants acting as principal resellers and distributors of the weapons across the boroughs of Queens and the Bronx. This investigation began in 2 parts. Following prior intelligence gathered during the summer of 2021, Anthony Sanford sold 5 handguns to an undercover police officer, as well as .357 and .40 caliber ammunition in August and October of 2021. Sanford's nephew Oliver was observed conducting counter-surveillance during both transactions, and I want to pause for a moment to thank the undercover officer who made these buys. He ended up with 140 of these guns here today because an undercover officer risked his life every day to make these buys. So we want to give him a special thank you. They can't be here, obviously, but we thank them. An unrelated investigation initiated in November of 2021 revealed the workings of an arms dealer selling guns on the streets of the Bronx, later identified as defendant Jonathan Harris. NYPD detectives were able to link Harris to the Sanfords, demonstrating a larger illegal gun operation spanning the two boroughs from Tennessee. According to the charges, Jonathan Harris would routinely drive down to Knoxville, Tennessee, where he would meet with the defendant Richard Horn at gun shows to purchase these weapons. Although the state of Tennessee has some of the most lax laws in the country, we allege that defendant Horn intentionally failed to abide by federal regulations under the guise of a private vendor, while in fact operating as a major firearms dealer through what's called the gun show loophole. As alleged, upon purchasing these weapons from Horn, Harris would contact the customers, defendant Oliver in Queens and defendant Parsley in the Bronx, to arrange the delivery of guns to be resold. None of these weapons, none of the defendants have a license to possess or own firearms. I think that's important with the present controversy that is out there. None of these defendants have a license to possess or own firearms. This case demonstrates the exhaustive work of my office and the NYPD in infiltrating gun trafficking rings to make sure that these weapons never end up in this borough or in the city of New York. We take the violence seriously. We take the gun violence epidemic extremely seriously. I want to thank the United States Attorney for the District of Tennessee and the ATF Field Office in their assistance in effectuating the out-of-state arrest. Once again, to the members of the NYPD, including the undercover officers, we want to thank you on behalf of the Violent Criminal Enterprise Bureau and my office. I'd like to now introduce our Police Commissioner, Keechant Sewell, who amazingly runs the NYPD in a fashion that gets guns off the street every single day. We thank her for her leadership. We thank her for the people that she is in charge of. And we thank her for being here today in Queens County. Commissioner?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I, too, want to thank our partner, Queens DA Melinda Katz and her team, for their extraordinary work and their invaluable partnership. And your NYPD Chief of Detectives, James Essig, and his exceptional investigators and undercoverers in the firearm suppression section for their work in this case. Every day, on all fronts, the NYPD is attacking gun violence. Our gun arrests are at a 27-year high, and we've seized more than 4,000 guns since the start of this year, and we are not taking our foot off the gas, as you can see on this table. This is a textbook example of an NYPD and Queens DA long-term intelligence-driven investigation. It highlights the power of our partnerships as we work together to make this city safer. I will now turn it over to Chief James Essig for details on this case.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon. I just want to introduce some of the members who are responsible for this case. Inspector Brian Gill, the commanding officer of the Firearm Investigations Unit, Captain Jeffrey Heilig, the executive officer, Lieutenant Ruben Pagan, who supervised this case, along with Sergeant Eric Francis, the two case officers, Detective Ruben Cespedes and Detective Al Valderrama. Obviously, as the district attorney said, undercover could not be here today, but once again, I want to stress that this is extremely dangerous work. And 19 years ago, in March of 2003, Detectives Rodney Andrews and Detectives James DeMoran were murdered in Staten Island doing the exact same buys our undercovers did here. So, as to the investigation, in August of 2021, the Firearms Investigations Unit began an investigation into the illegal sale of firearms within the confines of Queens County. This investigation was initiated when a source of information within the community contacted Detective Cespedes, identifying subjects who were trafficking firearms. Undercover officers were able to purchase 145 firearms. During the course of this investigation, a total of 182 firearms were recovered, spanning an area from southeast Queens to the Soundview section of the Bronx. However, in a 2-mile radius of where these undercover buys were being conducted in Queens, a total of 40 shootings, incidents, and 200 ShotSpotter activations occurred since January of 2021. Detectives using undercover buys and working with the Queens District Attorney's Office obtained wiretaps and were able to determine the weapons and supplier were from Tennessee. Last night, members of the Firearms Investigation Unit arrested 5 members of this trafficking crew. They are being charged with criminal sale of firearms in the 1st degree, criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd, and conspiracy in the 4th degree. Arrested in New York City was Anthony Sanford, a male 57 years old of Queens with 17 prior arrests, including 8 for criminal possession of a controlled substance and 3 for criminal sale of controlled substance. His nephew, Oliver Sanford, male 40 years old of Queens, was also arrested. A 3rd male, Thomas Parsley, male 44 years old of the Bronx, with 2 prior arrests, both criminal possession of a weapon. Jonathan Harris, a male 38 years old, also of the Bronx, with 6 prior arrests, including 2 for criminal possession of a weapon, 2 for assault, 1 for criminal negligent homicide occurred in 2014, and 1 for a robbery. Finally, the supplier of the weapons, a Richard Horn, male 70 years old, of Blounteville, Tennessee. Of note, earlier today, there were Mr. Hount's arrest by Regional Task Force in Tennessee. 95 guns were recovered from his residence. This case is part of our ongoing plan to attack violence. By preventing guns from making their way here onto our streets, we are saving many future victims of this gun violence. Once again, I want to thank the undercovers, the detectives, and the supervisors who did this case, and Melinda Katz and her staff. They're a great working partner to take these guns off the street. So with that, we'll take questions.
As simply as you can, Madam DA, can you explain how did this work without getting into too much of the minutia, but just give us an overview of how this works.
So the defendant, Richard Horn, in Tennessee, and John or Philip, if you can chime in whenever you'd like. Horn would sell the guns at a gun show, and he knew they were coming up to New York City, which is part of the charges. And then they would be brought up here, and they would be given to Sanford and to Parsley. And Parsley then, and those two would then resell them in the different boroughs, one in Queens and one in Bronx. And they totaled about 182 guns that are sitting in front of you. But Horn is the person in Tennessee that was selling them, and the cover was basically a gun show.
And so what, then they were selling them to undercover cops not knowing this?
No, so what was happening is he was giving it to the runner. The runner would bring it up to Queens and to the Bronx. They would give it to Sanford and to Parsley. And then Sanford and Parsley would sell them on the streets of the boroughs. And unbeknownst to them, they sold them to an undercover.
How much were they being sold for?
That is a good question.
The average price was $1,035.
So these were not cheap, there's only one ghost gun on the table, right?
Yep.
These are not cheap firearms, these are like expensive.
Yeah, it's aftermarket price, so typically people will charge double retail on a legal, a firearm purchased.
Commissioner, not to minimize this in any way, but considering the amount of gun violence and the amount of guns, how much of a dent does 180 guns make?
The amount of damage 182 guns can make is significant. We will continue to take as many as we can illegal firearms off the streets.
But I'd like to comment on that. This is about accountability. This is about people understanding in the city of New York that if they're going to buy illegal guns on the street, that the NYPD and the DA's office are watching, and that they will be held accountable for their actions. And I think sometimes people wonder about that, and they need to know that accountability exists, and we will hold them to that standard. We have a lot of investigations going on. We know what damage 182 guns can cause, as the commissioner said. And just think about that. These are 182 guns that will never kill someone.
How did the gun show loophole fit into this? You mentioned that before. Exactly how was that taken to pass?
So, anybody want to explain that? I can do it, but you explain it. They're allowed to sell a certain amount of guns at a gun show, but even in Tennessee, where there is gun show permits or vendors, there are certain rules that you need to abide by. This vendor was not abiding by all the rules, and he was selling them knowing that they were coming up to the city of New York, and that is something that we learned from the wire that we put on, and I'm happy to turn it over to Philip.
And even as a private seller in Tennessee, when you sell this amount of guns, you must still do a basic federal check. And if you don't have a license to sell guns, you can go to a person who does have the license and you say, can you run this background check for me because I'm only a private seller? So that's what our defendant failed to do, any of that.
Just to clarify, when you say loophole, you mean that there was an opening in the law to do this or it wasn't being enforced?
Go ahead. I'll let the PD answer that.
Private
You know,
vendor.
he was acting as an FFL without an FFL. So the gun show loophole, he was acting as a federal firearms licensee without a license. He's acting in bad faith. So even if person-to-person sales in Tennessee are legal, his intent was for them to come to New York for him to make money, which makes him a criminal.
Dear Katz, could you tell us with the charges that these individuals are facing, are they going to be held on bail, or will they be back on?
They were being arraigned as we were coming in, and I don't know exactly. They're all remanded. All of them have been remanded at the request of the district attorney.
DA Katz or perhaps Chief Essig, what's the danger that this product is going to have a secondary market to counties to the east and to the north? Is there any intelligence about that? Or is it...
I'm not sure I understand.
I think I can say that. This case, we went up the investigative steps. We were able to get a wiretap, and we were well aware of all the guns were going. So we're confident we have all the guns once we got our hooks into all the players in this organization, and we arrested everyone we identified in this case.
No danger that it's going to go...
No, I mean, before we dealt with them, I don't know where they were selling guns. But once we started dealing with them, and once we were monitoring their communications, we were very confident we knew where the guns were going.
Yeah, and I'm going to be very clear that, in an investigation, you can take down an investigation at points certain throughout the time. The NYPD in this office purposely waited so that we could find out where the source was, where the guns were coming from. We understand, as law enforcement, that where the guns are coming from is paramount importance so that it doesn't have a residual effect on guns that we're not catching by these particular defendants.
Last question, please. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
You want to say something? No? We thank everyone for their presence once again, and see you soon, I hope.
You wanted to take a picture?